Chapter 5. The Chorus Sings. They traveled through what Pip called the Deep Gray, a stretch of lowland valley where the canopy overhead grew so thick that the difference between light window and dim was merely a variation in shade. The light window registered above them as a faint brightening in the gray, but the canopy filtered it to almost nothing. Down here, the sky was organic, and the only constant was the pale light it produced. Pip navigated by landmarks invisible to Rowan. A stump with a particular pattern of shelf growth. A rock formation shaped, she said. Like a dog sitting down, though Rowan had never seen a dog and took her word for it. A place where 3 dead trees leaned together and the growth on their trunks formed overlapping plates of pale blue that Pip called staircase caps. If you're ever lost in the deep gray, find a staircase cap cluster and look at which side of the trunk it grows on, Pip said, ducking under a low branch, thick with growth. Always the wet side, which down here is always west because that's where the moisture comes from. The coast is west, and meridian is west, so staircase caps point you home. That assumes you consider meridian home, Rowan said. Meridian is where the food is. That's close enough. She glanced back at him. You're keeping up better than I expected. Most mountain folk stumble on flat ground. It's the depth perception. The dim distorts it when you're used to distance. She was right. The flat terrain confused his eyes in ways the mountain never had. On the mountain, he could judge distance by the layering of ridges, each one slightly lighter than the one before it. The atmosphere itself providing a scale. Here, the ambient light flattened everything, and near and far looked the same. He compensated by watching his feet and trusting the path, which felt like a concession his mountain instincts resisted. Pip talked while they walked. She talked about the settlements she had visited and the things she had traded there. A compass for 3 days of food in Ashford. A sealed jar of before vitamins for passage through the Millrace toll gate. And a working pair of scissors, real steel, for a wool blanket and a bag of dried crickets at Kettle Fork. Each transaction was a story. And each story contained a map of how the scattered communities of the dim survived by passing objects and favors between them in a web of exchange that had no center and no authority. Only the mutual recognition that nobody had enough and everybody had something. Rowan absorbed this without comment. He was learning more about the world from Pip's chatter than he had learned from 34 years of reading. The books described systems, but Pip described people. The red stretch appeared in the early afternoon, though afternoon was a guess in the deep gray. Pip stopped at the edge of a clearing where the growth changed color. The usual blues and greens gave way to a brownish orange that deepened. Over the span of perhaps 50 meters, into a dull red. The red species grew in low mats close to the ground, dense and uniform, with a texture that looked almost like velvet. The air above the patch had a faint haze to it, a slight thickening that turned the light murky. Spore cloud, Pip said, keeping her voice low. The red ones release spores constantly. Low concentration out here at the edge, but in the middle it gets thick enough to taste. One crossing won't kill you. Regular exposure will. She pulled a strip of cloth from her bag and tied it over her nose and mouth. Cover up, breathe shallow, and walk fast. Do not stop in the middle no matter what, because the spores make some people dizzy. And if you sit down in there, you'll breathe more and get dizzier. And that's a cycle you do not want. Rowan tied his own cloth across his face, using the waxed wrapping from his mushroom rations. The material was not ideal, but it would filter the larger particles. The cloth pressed against his mouth with each inhale, warm and close, and he could hear his own breathing loud and rhythmic inside the makeshift mask. Stay close, Pip said, her voice muffled through her own covering. Straight across, 90 seconds if we move. She went, and Rowan followed. The red stretch was worse than it looked from the edge. The spore haze thickened as they moved inward, reducing visibility to a few meters. The air tasted sweet and metallic through the cloth. A taste that coated his tongue and sat in the back of his throat. The ground was soft underfoot, each step compressing the red mat and releasing small puffs of dust that rose to knee-height before dispersing. Rowan breathed shallow, counting steps, his eyes on Pip's back as she moved fast and steady through the murk. The only sounds were his breathing, her breathing, and the soft compression of their boots on the mat. No other life moved in here. 40 steps, and 60. The haze was thickest here, the red light giving everything a dim, wrong tint that made the ground and the air and Pip's back all look like variations of the same color. His eyes watered, and his throat itched. He could feel the spores as a faint grit in his nostrils despite the cloth. The ground tilted. The flat distortion he had been compensating for all day suddenly tipped further, and his next step landed wrong, his ankle rolling on the soft mat. He went down on one knee. The cloth shifted against his mouth, and he sucked in a breath of something sweeter and thicker than what he had been breathing. His vision narrowed. A hand caught his pack strap from above and pulled. Pip braced over him, hauling him upright with a strength he had not registered in her thin frame. "Up," she said, her voice muffled and close to his ear. "And here we go. 61, 62, 63. Counting works because counting is something to do that is not breathing. And you want to do less breathing right now, so count with me. 64, 65. He walked. She did not let go of the strap, and she did not stop counting. And the numbers came out of her in the same fast rhythm as everything else she said, and it was, he understood eventually, the same instinct that filled every silence, the instinct to keep the air full of something that was not the dim itself. She talked to keep going, and she was talking him across. 70. 71. Almost there now. The color is changing, you can see it, can't you? 72. 80 steps, and the red started to thin. The usual colors began to reassert themselves at the margins, the reds mixing briefly into something brownish before giving way entirely. Pip crossed the boundary and kept walking for another 20 paces before she stopped and pulled the cloth from her face. Rowan did the same. The air on this side tasted clean by comparison, the damp, organic smell a relief after the metallic sweetness. His knee where he had landed throbbed, and the inside of his throat felt scraped. "You went down fast," Pip said, watching his face. "Faster than most people. The depth perception thing. I should have warned you about it before we crossed. You said walk fast and do not stop. I did not stop." "You almost did." She pulled out her flask and held it out to him. Swish and spit. Drink again. Gets the spore residue out. He did, and the water came back tasting faintly of the metallic sweetness for the first rinse. Cleaner for the second. Pip drank from her own flask, capped it, adjusted her pack. "That's the only red patch on this route," she said. "There's a bigger one south of here, but we're not going that way." They continued west. The terrain rose slightly, the valley narrowing as foothills emerged on either side, and the canopy thinned enough that the clouds reappeared above him, gray and featureless and close. The light window was fading, the dim deepening by degrees. The shift was gradual, almost unnoticeable moment to moment, but across an hour the landscape transformed from a place lit from above to a place lit from within. The ambient light from the growth around them intensified until the path, the trees, the rocks all produced their own illumination. A luminous world with no source and no shadow. Pip found their shelter as the deep dim settled in. A concrete structure, squat and windowless, set into the base of a hill. A water pumping station from before, she explained, the machinery long since scavenged but the walls still sound. The interior was dry, the concrete thick enough to resist moisture. and someone had cleared the floor and left a fire ring of stacked stones near the doorway. "I stay here every time I make this run," Pip said, dropping her pack against the wall. The bag clinked as it settled. "There's a clean spring 50 paces uphill. The walls keep the spores out, and the acoustics are good." "Good for what?" Rowan asked. Pip smiled. "You'll see." They ate. Pip produced dried insects from her pack, small brown beetles that crunched when chewed and tasted faintly of smoke. She offered them to Rowan alongside a handful of ghostcap mushrooms, dried and leathery, with a flavor like concentrated broth. In exchange, Rowan showed her the second of her broken flashlights. This one had a different problem. The mainspring was intact, but the winding gear had lost 2 teeth, causing it to skip under load. He explained the mechanism as he worked, naming each component, describing how the energy transferred from crank to spring to drive gear to LED. Pip watched with the same focused intensity she had shown before. Her fingers mirrored his movements unconsciously, her hands twitching as he turned the screwdriver, as if she were memorizing the motions for later rehearsal. "The gear teeth are what make the mechanism work smoothly," Rowan said, holding the winding gear up so she could see the damaged section. "When teeth are missing, the gear skips. The energy goes nowhere or goes in the wrong direction. You need every tooth engaged for the transfer to be continuous." "Can you fix it with teeth missing?" Pip asked. "I can file the adjacent teeth to compensate for the gap. The mechanism will be less efficient, but it will function." He worked the file from his multi-tool along the edge of the tooth next to the gap, removing a thin curl of metal. "This is not a permanent repair. The filed teeth will wear faster. But it will give you light for months before it fails again. Months of light for a handful of beetles." Pip shook her head. "I'm getting the better deal." "You are also guiding me to Meridian," Rowan said. "The beetles are a bonus." Pip laughed. The sound hit the concrete walls and came back sharp and close. "A bonus. Nobody's ever called my cooking a bonus before." They sat in the doorway of the pumping station, the deep dim spread before them, the valley lit from within by a landscape that pulsed at a dozen different tempos. Rowan worked on the flashlight. Pip sat with her knees drawn up, her restless fingers still for once, her attention divided between his hands and the sky above. Rowan stopped working on the flashlight and reached into his pack. His hand found the wax paper packet at the bottom, the one with the dried herbs his mother had been steeping into tea since the cough started. He had brought a portion of it for himself in case the cough was something contagious, which they both knew it was not. He held the packet for a moment in the dim, then put it back. 4 days on the road. The medicine she still had at home would last another 3 weeks by his count. She had told him not to think about her while he was gone, which was the kind of thing she said and did not mean. Then it came. Not a sound at first, but a feeling. A vibration in the concrete beneath him so low it registered in his bones before his ears identified it as anything. The floor hummed and the walls hummed with it. The air in the doorway seemed to thicken. Not with moisture, but with something else. A pressure that was also a frequency, building at the bottom edge of hearing. Rowan set down the flashlight. His hands went flat against the concrete floor, palms down, feeling the vibration travel through the stone and into his fingers. The vibration rose. It crossed the threshold into audible sound, and when it did, it was not one sound but many. Harmonic layers overlapping, each at a slightly different pitch. Low tones and middle tones braided into a chord that had no name in any music Rowan had encountered, which admittedly was none. But his physics textbook had described harmonics, standing waves, resonance, the way a vibrating string produces not just its fundamental frequency, but a series of overtones that stack upward in mathematical relationships. The mathematics were there, the layered frequencies, the harmonic relationships. But the sound was too varied, too shifting. too alive to be the product of a vibrating string or a mechanical system. It swelled and receded and swelled again, and the receding was not a decrease in volume, but a shift in the harmonic balance. Certain frequencies dropping while others rose. The chord constantly rewriting itself. He looked at Pip. She was watching him, her head tilted slightly, an expression he could not read. "First time is always something," Pip said quietly. The valley filled with the sound. The concrete walls of the pumping station resonated, adding their own frequency to the mix. And then something changed outside, and Rowan saw it before he understood it. The landscape, which had been pulsing at its own scattered rhythms, all those individual tempos he had grown accustomed to over 2 days of travel, began to shift. One by one, like instruments joining a song, the different species found the chorus's lowest frequency and matched it. The slow ones quickened, and the fast ones slowed. Over the span of perhaps 30 seconds, the entire visible valley synchronized, the landscape breathing as a single organism, brightening and dimming in time with the deepest note of the sound that filled the sky. Rowan watched it happen. "What is it?" he asked. The words came out barely louder than the hum that surrounded them. "The chorus," Pip said the name carefully. "The way a person names something they have learned to live alongside without understanding. That's what everyone calls it. The sound comes most nights when the dim is deepest, and it comes from up there." She pointed at the sky. "From inside the clouds, or above them. Nobody knows." "How far away is the source?" Rowan asked. "Nobody knows that either." Pip pulled her knees tighter against her chest, her chin resting on them. "People in Ashford think it's machines left over from before, still running on some power source nobody's found. The Millrace settlement thinks it's ghosts. Actual ghosts, the spirits of everyone who died in the first years, which is a lot of ghosts." The chorus shifted above them, a new harmonic rising, almost melodic, and Pip paused to listen. "Kettlefork says it's the clouds themselves, some kind of atmospheric vibration, like weather you can hear. Meridian thinks it's alive." The new harmonic held for 10 or 15 seconds, then folded back into the larger pattern and was replaced by something deeper. "What do you think?" Rowan asked. Pip was quiet. Her fingers had found the strap of her bag again and were working it slowly. But the motion was different from her usual restless fidgeting, slower and more deliberate. "I think they're pretty," she said. "I think they're the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, and I hear them all the time, and it never stops being true. Whatever they are, wherever they come from. The chorus is the one thing in the dim that feels like it's not just surviving. It feels like it's doing something on purpose." Rowan watched her listen. Her chin was on her knees and her face had gone soft, the composure she usually carried set aside for the duration of the sound. He had no theory about the chorus, and no settlement's interpretation to offer her. What he had was the mountain. On the mountain, when the wind comes through the collector cables, it makes a sound, he said. Always the same note, because the cables are always the same length. My father called it the only honest music. Said anything with one note was honest, because it could only ever say one thing. He listened to the chorus shift again above them. This is not one note. This is a thing that has more than one thing to say. Pip turned her head to look at him. She did not say anything, but the look held, and he did not look away. The chorus lasted 3 hours. It faded the way it had arrived. The upper harmonics dropping first, the middle range thinning, the low vibration persisting longest, a hum that lived in the concrete and the bones in the ground itself until it was less a sound than a memory of sound. Then silence, or what passed for silence in the dim, the drip of moisture, the soft, wet creak of things growing, the settling of old structures into their slow collapse. Pip had fallen asleep against the wall, her head on her pack, her breathing steady. Rowan sat awake. Outside, the valley had returned to its scattered rhythms, each species keeping its own time again. the unison broken with the chorus's departure. He picked up the flashlight and resumed filing the damaged gear tooth. The small, scraping sound was thin and precise against the quiet of what had filled this valley an hour ago. He worked in the dim light, patient and methodical, and did not sleep for a long time. Somewhere above the clouds, something had been singing. Not the wind through cables, not one note. A thing with more than one thing to say was a thing that knew it was saying it. He set the file down and listened to the silence. And the silence had a shape now, and the shape was the absence of something that could choose when to speak.
Chapter Guild, Stories for Your Mind.